The smell of roasted chicken filled the dining room, but to Lena, it might as well have been smoke. Every family dinner lately felt like sitting in a house fire, silent, suffocating, and full of things left unsaid. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, counting down to something she couldn't name but could feel in her bones. Her father sat at the head of the table, cutting his meat with mechanical precision. Her mother served mashed potatoes, her eyes never meeting anyone's. And across from Lena sat her younger sister, Chloe, 17, pretty, spoiled, and fully aware of both. She was tapping on her phone beneath the table, smirking at something on the screen. "Put that thing down," their father barked suddenly, his voice slicing through the silence. Chloe rolled her eyes but obeyed, setting her phone down beside her plate. His eyes then shifted, sharp and assessing, toward Lena. And that's when it came. "Lena," he began, tone calm but carrying that edge she had come to dread. "Your sister needs a bigger room. She's starting her senior year. She's got projects, art supplies, friends coming over. She needs space." Lena blinked. "Okay," she said slowly, unsure where this was going. Her father placed his fork down neatly, folded his hands, and looked straight at her. "So, she'll take yours." The air froze. Even the old clock seemed to hesitate. "What?" Lena asked, voice soft but trembling. "You're serious?" "Yes," he said plainly. "You're 21. You're an adult. It's time you started thinking about moving out anyway." Her mother's eyes flickered up briefly, then back down. "Maybe it's not such a bad idea," she murmured. "You could find a small place near work." "Mom," Lena interrupted, her heart pounding. "I barely make enough at the bookstore to cover food and transport." "You really think I can afford rent right now?" Her father's expression hardened. "Then find a better job. You've been coasting long enough." Coasting. The word hit like a slap. He made it sound so easy, like all she did was drift, like she hadn't been juggling classes, shifts, and exhaustion for years. Chloe looked up, feigning sympathy. "You could always stay with friends for a while," she offered sweetly, a little too quickly. "I mean, it's not like you have much stuff." Lena turned to her, disbelief etched on her face. "You want my room that badly? It's not about wanting it," Chloe replied with a shrug. "It just makes sense. I'm still in school. You're not." Her father leaned back, signaling the end of discussion. "It's settled then. Move your things out by the weekend." Lena's stomach twisted. She looked between them, the people who were supposed to love her, and felt nothing but distance. Her voice shook as she whispered, "You're choosing convenience over your own daughter." "We're choosing practicality," her father corrected coolly. "You can't live here forever, Lena." The words dropped like stones into the quiet. Her mother's hands trembled slightly, but she said nothing. Silence. That was her mother's version of love. Safe, controlled, empty. Lena stared at her plate, the mashed potatoes gone cold. Her chest felt tight, like every breath scraped her throat. She wanted to scream, to fight, to make them see, but she knew better. She'd learned long ago that arguing only proved their point, that she was difficult. So instead, she stood up slowly, her chair scraping the floor. "You know what?" she said softly. "You're right. Maybe it's time I stop being a burden." Her father looked mildly surprised, maybe even relieved. "I'm glad you understand." "Oh, I do," she said, her voice steadying. "I understand perfectly." She walked upstairs in silence, every creak of the steps echoing like a goodbye. In her room, the one she painted herself, the one filled with memories and dreams, she took out 2 suitcases. The zipper sounded loud in the quiet. She folded her clothes carefully, one by one, tears falling silently. Not loud, heaving sobs, just quiet, endless tears that soaked into the fabric she packed away. She looked around at the posters, the books, the little fairy lights she'd hung when she was 15, back when she still believed home meant safety. It was strange, packing your whole life into 2 bags. Stranger, still knowing no one downstairs would come up to stop you. By the time she was done, it was past midnight. She zipped the last suitcase, glanced at her reflection in the mirror. Puffy eyes, trembling hands, but something fierce burning behind them. Not hatred, not even anger. Just a cold, quiet resolve. She grabbed her coat and suitcase handles, pausing only once, by the door. Her mother's muffled voice drifted up from below. "Maybe she just needs time to grow up," she was saying softly. Her father replied, "She'll thank us one day." Lena exhaled shakily. "No," she whispered to herself, "you'll be the ones thanking me." She stepped outside. The air was cold, almost sharp against her skin. The house loomed behind her. Dark windows, pale walls, a silhouette of everything she'd outgrown. She looked at it one last time. "You wanted me gone," she said quietly, "so I'll go. But when I come back, you won't recognize me." Then she turned and walked into the night, suitcase wheels clicking on the pavement like a heartbeat, leaving behind not just a house, but a lifetime of being unseen. And though her eyes burned and her throat ached, somewhere deep inside, a small spark flickered alive. It whispered the words her heart couldn't yet believe. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." The first night away from home was the hardest. Lena sat on the edge of her friend Maya's couch, staring at the shadows that stretched across the walls. It wasn't the creak of the old apartment or the hum of traffic outside that kept her awake. It was the silence. The kind that filled the gaps where love should have been. Maya tried to comfort her. "You can stay as long as you need," she'd said softly, handing her a blanket. But Lena saw the strain behind her friend's kind eyes. Maya had her own bills, her own cramped space. Lena knew she couldn't impose forever. Days blurred into weeks. Lena spent mornings searching job listings on her phone, afternoons working double shifts at a bookstore, and nights wondering when life would stop feeling like punishment. She'd eat instant noodles sitting cross-legged on the floor, scrolling through apartment ads she couldn't afford. Sometimes she passed by her old neighborhood on the bus, watching familiar streets glide by like ghosts. The house still stood there, neat and proud, with the same porch lights glowing warm against the dark. But it wasn't her home anymore. It never had been. One evening, as she left her shift, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her father, the first in months. Just one line, "Hope you're doing well. Your sister's room looks great now." No apology, no warmth. Just a reminder that she'd been replaced. Lena stood there in the cold, staring at the message until her eyes blurred. Then she deleted it, exhaled deeply, and walked on. Her breath came out white in the night air, proof she was still alive, even if her heart didn't feel it yet. 3 months later, Lena finally found a tiny room for rent above a cafe downtown. The rent was cheap because the walls were thin and the floor slanted slightly. But to her, it was freedom. She furnished it with secondhand finds. A mattress, a chip desk, and a small kettle that wheezed every morning as she made coffee. She pinned a note to her wall that said, "Start somewhere." And she did. She enrolled in night classes for business administration, hoping to turn her interest in real estate into something tangible. During the day, she worked at the bookstore, stacking novels she couldn't afford to read, and on weekends she helped Maya's cousin with social media ads for her small furniture business. Every penny mattered. Every moment was borrowed time. But for the first time in her life, her choices were hers alone. One rainy evening, she overheard 2 customers at the bookstore discussing a tech startup. "Real estate analytics," one said. "They're hiring interns. Not paid much, but there's potential." The words clung to her like hope disguised as coincidence. That night, Lena drafted a resume. It was thin. Just a few lines of experience and a mountain of determination. When she sent the email, she didn't expect a reply. But a week later, she got one. "Hi Lena, we'd like to schedule an interview for the Real Space internship. Ethan Shaw, CEO." She reread it 3 times, hardly breathing. The interview was in a modern office downtown, all glass walls and quiet energy. Ethan Shaw, mid-30s, sharp eyes but kind smile, sat across from her. He scanned her resume, then looked up. "You don't have much experience in analytics," he said. "No," Lena admitted, "but I learned fast. I just need a chance." Something in her voice, that raw mixture of hunger and honesty, seemed to convince him. "You start Monday," he said simply. The first weeks were brutal. Lena stayed late every night, trying to learn everything. Data tools, property mapping, even the basics of coding. While other interns went home at 6, she stayed until midnight, eating granola bars at her desk. When the company launched new project tracking market behavior, Ethan asked for volunteers. Lena raised her hand first. "You sure?" he asked. It's extra work and no extra pay." She smiled faintly. "I'm sure." The project became her obsession. She spent nights analyzing trends, reading reports, and connecting dots others missed. One evening, Ethan found her still working under the dim office lights. "You're here again?" he asked, amused. "I figured out why our prediction model misses undervalued neighborhoods," she said, excitement in her voice. "It's emotional psychology. People buy based on what feels right, not just numbers. We're not mapping emotions, only data." Ethan stared at her for a moment, then smiled. "You're right." He presented her findings to investors 2 weeks later, with full credit to her. It impressed the entire board. From that moment, everything shifted. Lena wasn't invisible anymore. 6 months later, she was promoted to project assistant. The pay was modest, but enough for her to move into a slightly better apartment. Still small, but with a window that caught morning light. She bought herself fresh flowers every week. Sometimes, she'd sit by that window, sipping cheap coffee and watching the sunrise spill across the buildings. The world felt wider now, unpredictable, but full of color. One night, she received another message from her mother. "We miss you. Dad doesn't say it, but he asks about you sometimes." Lena stared at the screen. For a long time, she didn't reply. Then she typed, "I'm doing well. Tell Chloe I hope she likes her room," and left it at that. She put her phone aside, opened her laptop, and got back to work. Because for the first time in her life, her dreams weren't built on approval. They were built on effort. The shadows that once haunted her now stood behind her, like chapters she'd survived. She was still tired, still learning, still fragile at the edges, but she was no longer lost. And somewhere deep inside, the same quiet promise echoed again. "They told me to leave so I could grow, and I did." Lena's alarm buzzed at 6 every morning, but now it no longer felt like dread. It felt like purpose. She had built herself a rhythm: early coffee, long hours, quiet determination. Each spreadsheet, each late-night analysis, each exhausted morning was shaping her into someone stronger. By the time she turned 25, she had climbed higher than she'd ever imagined. Real space had grown fast, and so had her reputation. People began to notice her ability to see what others couldn't, to sense where opportunity lived in numbers. Investors trusted her judgment, colleagues sought her advice, and even Ethan often said, "Lena, you have instincts the data can't teach." Still, she wanted more. Not wealth, not recognition, just control. She wanted to build something that couldn't be taken from her, like that room she'd once been forced to surrender. The idea came one sleepless night. She had been studying patterns in market behavior and realized something no one else had quantified. Emotion dictated real estate more than logic ever could. People didn't buy houses, they bought belonging. If she could measure that, she could predict markets before anyone else. She started sketching plans in a notebook. By morning, she had the blueprint of her future company, a real estate analytics platform that would merge psychology with predictive AI. She called it Metrics. It started as a small side project. Ethan knew about it, even encouraged her, but she sensed his company wasn't ready to evolve that way. So she worked quietly, funding it with her savings, every dollar hard-earned. She rented a tiny shared office with 2 interns who believed in her vision. They worked day and night, coding, testing, failing, fixing. The breakthrough came when one of her algorithms successfully predicted a neighborhood boom 3 months before major firms caught it. Within weeks, investors began calling. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She was a founder. The growth was explosive. In the first year, Metrics gained attention from global investors. Articles called her the woman who turned empathy into data. She gave interviews, appeared on podcasts, and signed partnerships that took her company from an idea in a notebook to a valuation worth millions. She could hardly process it. There were days she would pause in the middle of a crowded office, listening to the sound of keyboards clicking, her team laughing, screens glowing with her logo, and feel her chest tighten with disbelief. There was one moment she'd never forget. The day her financial advisor told her, "Lena, your net worth just crossed $5 million. She'd stared at the document in silence. The number looked unreal. For a long time, she just sat there, remembering that night she'd left home with 2 suitcases and no one to stop her. Weeks later, she stumbled upon a real estate listing purely by chance, a property she recognized immediately, a sprawling white mansion on Hillcrest Drive. She'd seen it 1,000 times before, back when she was a teenager sitting in the back seat of her father's car. He'd always slow down as they passed it, saying, "Now that's a dream house." Her mother would smile wistfully. If only we could ever afford it. Now Lena could. She scheduled a private viewing. When she arrived, the gate opened with a quiet hum, revealing manicured lawns, marble columns, and windows that shimmered under the sun. The realtor was talking about square footage and architecture, but Lena barely heard him. Her mind was filled with memories, her father's voice, her mother's sighs, her sister's laughter. In the grand foyer she stood still for a long moment. The sunlight fell across the floor, illuminating her reflection in the polished tiles. She smiled faintly. "So this is what it feels like," she whispered, "to own what they only dreamed of." The realtor handed her the contract. "Would you like to make an offer?" Lena looked around, feeling the weight of her journey. "No," she said. "I'd like to buy it." The pen didn't shake in her hand. She signed her name slowly, deliberately, savoring every letter. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was proof that she had made it. Proof that being unwanted hadn't broken her. It had forged her. That night she walked through her new home barefoot, the marble cool under her feet. Every echo of her steps reminded her how far she'd come. The girl who once cried into her pillow, who left her house in silence, who worked herself to exhaustion. She had built her own empire. She stood by the tall glass window, looking out at the city lights below. They shimmered like tiny stars scattered across the earth. Somewhere down there, her parents still lived in the same modest house. They still passed by this neighborhood on Sundays, still dreaming about the life she now owned. Lena didn't feel bitterness anymore, just an overwhelming calm. She didn't buy the house to spite them. She bought it because it symbolized everything she'd become. Because when they'd told her to get out, she had obeyed, but not in defeat, in evolution. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the steps of her grand staircase, letting the silence wrap around her. For the first time in years, it wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of peace. Tomorrow, the movers would bring her things. The office would call. The next venture would begin. But tonight, she let herself simply exist. Not as the daughter who was told to leave, not as the woman who proved them wrong, but as someone who had finally found her own place in the world. She glanced around the vast empty space and smiled. "I found my room," she said quietly, and in that single whisper, every memory, every wound, every sleepless night turned into something beautiful. The sound of freedom. Sunday mornings had always been her parents' tradition. Breakfast at the same cafe, a slow drive through the nicer neighborhoods, and the same wistful conversation about houses they could never afford. Her mother loved to look at the architecture. Her father loved to imagine owning one. They'd point out the manicured lawns and say, "Maybe someday." That morning was no different, until they turned the corner onto Hillcrest Drive. Her mother's voice trailed off mid-sentence. Her father's hands froze on the steering wheel. Parked in front of the grand white mansion they used to dream about was a sleek black car. Movers were unloading boxes, carrying them through the open gates, and standing at the entrance, clipboard in hand, directing them with calm authority, was a woman they almost didn't recognize. It was Lena. She was taller now, her posture stronger, her hair tied neatly back. There was no trace of the nervous girl who once left their house in silence. She wore confidence like armor, effortless, natural. Her father hit the brakes without thinking, his mouth half open in disbelief. "Is that—" her mother started, her voice trembling. Her father didn't answer. He was already pulling over to the side of the road. He stepped out, adjusting his jacket, trying to collect himself. He walked toward the gate hesitantly, as if afraid she might vanish if he came too close. "Lena?" he called, his voice uncertain. She turned. For a second, something flickered across her face. Recognition, then composure. She smiled politely. "Dad. Mom." Her mother hurried up beside him, eyes wide with emotion. "We were just driving by," she said breathlessly. "We didn't know you. You live here?" Lena glanced back at the house. "I just moved in last week," she said softly. "It's been busy." Her father's gaze swept over the mansion, the arched windows, the marble steps, the iron gates gleaming in the sun. This place This is the Hillcrest house, isn't it? It is, she said. He laughed once, a short, awkward sound. That must have cost a fortune. 5.2 million, she replied without hesitation. You used to call it your dream house, remember? Her father's face faltered. Her mother clasped her hands together, as if trying to hold back tears. Lena, this is incredible, she said. We're so proud of you. Lena studied them quietly. She could see the disbelief in their eyes, the regret hidden beneath pride. Her father tried to regain his old authority, the same tone he used when giving advice at the dinner table. You really made something of yourself, he said. I always knew you would if you just got out. She finished for him, voice gentle but steady. He froze, the words dying in his throat. She smiled faintly. You were right. Leaving was the best thing I ever did. Her mother took a small step forward. Can we come inside? Just for a minute? Lena hesitated. For a moment she almost said yes, out of habit, out of that lingering part of her that still wanted their approval. But then she remembered the night she left, the sound of her father's fork on his plate, the silence that followed her out the door. Not today, she said softly. I'm still settling in. Her mother's lips parted, but no sound came. Her father nodded stiffly, pretending not to be hurt. Of course, he said. You must be busy. Lena looked at them both, at the faces that had once turned away from her, and felt no anger, only peace. I am, she said, but I'm glad you stopped by. Really. Her assistant called her name from the porch. She turned slightly, her voice calm, professional. I'll be right there. Then she looked back at them one last time. You told me to give up my room or get out, she said quietly. I chose to get out. And now... She gestured behind her to the house glowing in the afternoon sun. I finally have a room no one can take away. Her mother's tears fell freely then. One hand pressed to her mouth. Her father looked down, his jaw tight, eyes glistening in a way Lena had never seen before. She gave them a small nod, not cruel, not triumphant, just final, and turned toward the gate. It swung shut behind her with a soft metallic click, separating the past from the present. Inside, the movers' voices faded as the house grew still. Lena walked through the grand foyer, her heels echoing across the marble floor. She paused near the staircase, looking out the tall windows at the city below. The same streets she once wandered with nothing but fear, and a suitcase now stretched out beneath her, glimmering with promise. She poured herself a glass of water from the kitchen, the sunlight spilling across the counters. There was no bitterness in her heart, only a quiet satisfaction. Not revenge, not triumph, but the calm realization that she had built a life on her own terms. As evening settled, she stepped out onto the balcony. The wind was soft, the sky painted gold and violet. Down the hill, cars passed, unaware of the story behind the house on the hill. The story of the girl who was told to leave, and instead learned how to rise. Lena leaned on the railing, the city lights flickering below, like stars she could finally reach. They wanted me to find myself, she whispered. I did. And as the sun disappeared behind the skyline, she smiled. Not at the house, not at her success, but at the peace that came from knowing she had nothing left to prove.